And we are live. I guess so. Good evening, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. We'll just wait for a few more minutes to allow people to just join. Typically, it's okay. Something happens typically a few minutes after
Yes.
the webinar starts. Feel free to say hi in the chat. Familiarize yourself with Demio. The chat is also the place where you can ask questions in between. So I will interview Masa today. We'll do a round of introduction in a second. But if you have questions in between, just feel free to post them to the chat. And I'll try to either ask them directly or maybe at the end, depending on whether they fit to the current status of our discussion. I also see some names from Forto. So if we need experts on certain topics, Masa, I think we have your expert team, SRE team, partly in the call. So you have a backup in case there's too detailed questions, which is always great.
Maybe Martin and Rodolfo for joining.
Cool. Maybe a few housekeeping rules. So this session is being recorded. You will get the recording in an email tomorrow before noon, whenever rendering is finished. We'll also share a few links in that email tomorrow, and obviously happy to jump on individual questions even after the webinar if you have questions that we cannot answer tonight.
Yeah, and feel free to post also comments if you find something useful that I told, or I don't know, something interesting or exciting. Happy to. I see the chat on the side, so some way to get some feedback as this is completely remote and I don't see any one of you.
Cool. I'd say we wait for a few more seconds and then we get started. All right, so let's kick this off officially. Hello again. My name is Christoph. I'm COO and co-founder of Humanitech. We are building a platform to help teams establishing their own internal developer platforms. So with Humanitech, you can easily build your own internal developer platform, but that's not what we are going to speak about tonight, even though I love speaking about that. But tonight I have Masa with me from Forto, and we are going to talk about Forto's and your personal journey, Masa, from Heroku to Kubernetes. And we are going to dive a bit deeper into the reasons why you switched to Heroku in the beginning, why you migrated away, how you executed the migration, and then what your key learnings are. I think it's a very interesting journey. I'm following this for quite a while now, and it shows how decisions on architecture and technical setup and infrastructure can change while growing a startup successfully. But maybe before jumping into this, Masa, it would be great if you introduce yourself and maybe tell a little bit about what Forto is doing for everybody in this call that maybe doesn't know Forto that well.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Christoph. And thank you again for having me. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I hope there will be something useful for you. So I'm Masa. I was born in Munich, but I'm not German. I'm half Japanese and half Austrian. So I always say, as a child, it was very easy for me to draw my flags because the only color I needed was red on a white paper. So I studied computer science at the TU Munich, went a little bit abroad during my studies to Sweden, did my master's thesis in the US. And now I'm in Berlin for more than 5 years. And more than 4.5 years ago, I started back then at FreightHub. So we were named FreightHub before Forto. Started as a third engineer and helped growing the engineering department and the company. And one fun fact about me, I used to work for a digital magician for more than 5 years. I was responsible for apps and technologies. So his name is Simon Piero, the iPad magician. Maybe you have seen him somewhere on YouTube or on TV. Kind of, he takes a tennis ball out of the iPad or he pours beer out of the iPad. If you want to check out more, it's on youtube.com/ariasmagic. So this is what I did before I started.
Will you show any of this tonight?
Tonight, no.
Okay.
I'm in general not performing. I'm only the guy behind building that stuff. So you won't find me on the videos, but everything you see on the iPads and iPhones is basically what I built before I came here. So that's kind of a fun fact about me.
All right, nice. Yeah, welcome again. Maybe before we get started, let me post a very short poll here in Demio. Basically to get a feeling of how much of Heroku our audience knows. So the question is you and Heroku. Possible answers are I'm using Heroku every day. I started thinking about migrating away. I'm in the process of migrating away. I already migrated away. And what is Heroku as the last option? Wow, we have 5 answers and 5 different choices. That's great. Okay. Seems that this people seem to be familiar with Heroku, so you don't have to go into a lot of detail there. And it looks also as if people would have started their migration journey. Nice. Thanks for answering this.
Great.
So maybe looking at the agenda again, as I already laid out, we'll start with why select Heroku in the beginning, then when is the best time to migrate away, how to plan and execute the migration, and learnings. So I'd say let's just jump into it. So if you
I can share just maybe one sentence or a few sentences about Forto. I'm not sure whether everybody knows what we are doing at Forto. So Forto is basically a log tech company founded in 2016. Our vision is to make shipping products as easy as sending emails. Think of a digital freight forwarder who's moving more towards supply chain. And now we don't own any assets, so we don't own any ships or any trucks. But we work with transport partners to deliver the goods for the customers from A to B. And we are now like 4 or 5 years out there, and we have caught up a lot with the incumbents already due to our, let's say, digital DNA. And last year, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were also able to ship 20 million masks from China to Germany for the government here, because we had a digital backbone and we had our partner network in China. So this was something really nice for me. 4 years ago when I started, I didn't anticipate that we will be able to contribute in such a way to such a situation. And what's powering that, maybe it's also useful to just share very quickly the stack that we are having.
Absolutely.
In general, we have an event-driven microservice architecture. We use MongoDB. We use Node with TypeScript, React with TypeScript, then Kubernetes on GCP, and we use AWS, SNS, and SQS. So you see already there, there's kind of a split, and this is also historic. We will talk about it today, but initially Heroku we have been running on AWS. And it sounds maybe a little bit odd, this multi-cloud setup, but it works. If you don't have a big pain point in cost, or in latency, then this is something that you can do for some time. One day we know we need to migrate one part to the other, but so far this is not our biggest pain point. So far to our stack.
Nice. And I recall also that you rely on a lot of integrations with other systems. So it's quite a zoo of different things you connect and manage. And okay, cool. Maybe if you go back to 2017, so 4 years back, and remember the time when you had to take the choice how to run this system, which was probably much smaller by then.
Yes.
Why? What were your thoughts at that time, and why did you go for Heroku?
Yes, that's a very good question. So the move to Heroku initially was part of a bigger transition from an application monolith to an event-driven microservice architecture. If you go back in time when we had been just 3 engineers, we were working on an application monolith, and we didn't have a clue about logistics at the beginning. So we were lacking kind of the domain knowledge to properly design, even within the monolith, the different components. So it was a lot of tight coupling inside there. We had then long deployment times. We were back then in the very early days using Docker and pushing to EC2 directly. We had incredibly complicated error-prone scripts, no ability to roll back, no certificate management, and the ability to deploy was just in a few engineers. So as we knew that kind of the initial, proving the business model worked. So in the beginning was really every month we needed to double our revenue. So it was a lot about speed and pumping out new features. But
so it's product market fit, proving
exactly,
product market fit.
Yes, exactly. with a very small seed funding that we raised in the beginning. And we knew that we are continuing to grow. So we grew in 2017 from 3 to 12 engineers. So the question was, how can we ensure that our engineers can effectively and efficiently release new features, right? Autonomy and ownership was not really clear with this monolith, and we wanted to make sure that our organization follows the architecture. And one of the reasons why we have been migrating away from this monolith was organizational reasons, right? How do you set up all these teams and so on? And we learned much more about how the domain works, about where the boundaries lie. And with that, in the beginning, we formed our first 2 teams, which was transfer planning and quotation. Both of those teams still exist today. So with this picture in mind, we knew, okay, we want to now go with event-driven microservice to support also the setup, to not step on each other's toes anymore. And that's kind of how we ended up with Heroku. Also to share some background there, most of us back then didn't have any experience with microservices or with async communication. So we needed...
That's always fun, because I just wanted to ask that, how much did you think about architecture back then? How much did you think about theoretical concepts? Probably, as I'm listening to you, not too much, right?
Yes, not too much. Yeah, exactly. So things have been moving. What was really clear for us that we needed to define the domain boundaries better. And as we learned much more about the domain and the business part of logistics, that was kind of the first step when we said, okay, now we'll do microservices. We'll use async communication because it will solve, it will help us in the growth. And we needed to really reduce the cognitive load around deploying things and so on. So with Heroku, we are able to reduce that. We also back then introduced Circle CI for deployments. It was now easy to roll back. We didn't need to think about infrastructure anymore. And suddenly everybody was able to release with the click of a button, which was not possible before. So this was kind of, for us, the Heroku part was just, the enabler, so our engineers can effectively design within that architecture and ship code in this event-driven microservice architecture. And it was all triggered that we had a proper understanding of what we needed next from the business perspective.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I just recall, I mean, many of you will probably, and you also probably know the book Team Topologies by Manuel Pais, and he's talking a lot about this problem of cognitive load. And I fully get that, especially in a small team. I mean, you don't want to have all the expertise on all the infrastructure topics that there are. So it sounds like Heroku was your choice to reduce cognitive load while enabling your microservice architecture back then.
Yes, very good point. Yeah. Cool.
And maybe jumping from here into the question on what do you think, what did you do during the migration there? What were your key learnings when migrating to this new event-driven architecture?
Yes, so what's important was really that we understand the domain and the business side very well. Otherwise, we won't be able to define these boundaries. And this was one of the big problems we had in the beginning, and everything was pretty messed up in the monolith. But once we kind of the land cleared a little bit for us, we were able to back that up with a proper architecture. So on a high level, mental models, most of mental models are wrong, but some can be more useful. I think of at a very high level, you kind of have a company strategy, and you can derive a product strategy from that. And from there, you can derive the architecture and the infrastructure, the software delivery capabilities. They need to kind of support the architecture that you want. And then you can design the org and make sure that the architecture that you want happens in terms of inverse convey maneuver.
So that's how you set up for success on Heroku. So you migrated your monolith there, and then it was happy developing, focusing on pushing out new functionality, probably for a while.
For some time, yes.
How long did that work well for you, and when did it tip so that you thought about taking the next step from Heroku to something else?
Yes, that's a very good question. So probably in the beginning it was really a big reliever. Teams felt, that they are really more autonomous, that they can ship independently from each other. And there were a lot of greenfield projects, right? A lot of new domain areas we started building. after 1.5 years, maybe also 2, something like this, the benefit of Heroku also resulted in a big downside, which is there's minimal overhead to bring applications to life. So what happened in our case is we didn't think so much anymore about where should the boundaries really lie. We didn't talk to the teams left and right of us to have these difficult or harder conversations on where should things go and where should they sit. So we brought up a lot of services left and right. And in some places, we kind of ended up with this distributed monolith because it was just so easy to bring up new applications. So this is kind of something to be really aware of. And I wish I had kind of hired an architect earlier who could kind of manage and the big picture of that, but we didn't have that back then. So this was definitely one of the big pain points that haunted us in the long run.
So you rushed into it, and the advantage of Heroku at some point became a disadvantage for you.
Yeah, kind of at a certain size, yes.
Okay, how about costs? I often hear people saying that this can also become a costly platform to run on. Was that also the case for you?
Yes, it's a very good question. So very often we compare costs of the old infrastructure versus the new infrastructure. In our case, probably by now, if you would still be with Heroku, the cost would have been exploded, but it was not the main reason. It was more driven by the architecture, because cost of people in general is most of way higher than on infrastructure. So in our case, also the cost for the people is orders of magnitude was higher than the infrastructure cost. So the time of the engineers is most valuable, and we need to optimize for that. So what kind of software delivery capabilities do we need to provide so that the engineers can efficiently work in the architecture we want to have? And together with this comes kind of this point of the cost of delay, especially in growth environments as ours, where we know that roughly every year we're doubling our engineering team size. So the cost of people is growing even faster than the one in infrastructure. And then we need to kind of balance, okay, maybe we can wait a little bit longer, but I know in a year I have 2x more engineers. And if they then now also need to migrate with this is going to be also quite costly. So there's kind of these things that we need to consider.
Well, okay, that's already in the thinking about when to best migrate, right? But if we take one step back, I mean, we said, okay, Heroku makes it very easy to spin up new applications. And if you don't control this, and if you don't have a good architectural picture, then this might get out of control and you end up with a zoo of microservices, or it's not really microservice. It's, as you said, it's a distributed monolith in the end. What were other challenges that you saw with this growing complexity of your application in Heroku?
One thing that happened, and it was also a result of having these distributed monolith, is we built a command line tool later that allowed for quick, bringing up of multiple applications to test it. We called it Shipyard back then, and I call it the distributed monolith creator because it was back then difficult to test these things because they were so tightly coupled. So we kind of came up with this command line tool to relieve some pain in the meantime, where you could define 3 services, and they brought it up in the new instances. The endpoints were configured to each other, the queues were pointing to each other, so you can easily test it. But that was kind of enforcing the whole anti-pattern. Be really aware because once you go down that way and you don't take a step back, the whole org just runs with it.
How did you manage configuration in that time?
Yes, that was also one of the pain points. We didn't have proper distinction between configuration and secrets. It was quite some error-prone process, like clicking, copy-pasting environments around and environment variables around. We were constantly releasing and forgetting to add environment variables. So this was really not ideal. At that time, actually, we also open sourced typed env. So it's kind of a enforceable environment variable contracts at runtime. You can check that out on our GitHub. It's not tackling the root cause here, but maybe that will be helpful for you too.
Yeah, we'll share the link later. So beyond the architectural questions you had and the number of microservices, there were also some challenges in this application management process and how to deal with that. Interesting. Yes. So when did you actually decide on migrating away? And combined question, how did you decide where to migrate to? Because I mean, migrating away from something is one thing, but you also have to decide what to migrate to, right?
Yes, that's a very good point. So we need to take both things into account. From an architecture point of view, we knew we wanted to stay with event-driven microservices. It's basically also just something that we learned as an engineering organization like 2 years ago. We just started with these things, and as you can see with these, sometimes when it ends up with a distributed model, there's still lots of things to learn. So we said we want to stay with that and not, for example, go towards serverless, which has been also discussed. And we went with Kubernetes. Back then it was already pretty well established. There was lots of things in a community, and we thought this is going to be the bet that will help us continue to grow, help us to ship lots of code quickly, and be flexible while we are discovering and understanding the business more and more. And we use I use the analogy a little bit of, driving a car. You can drive a car and you don't need to understand anything about its engine. And we believe, as a software engineer, that if you write code and you understand the basics of the platform the code is running on, that this will make you a better engineer or make you more effective in writing code. So we and there was also a huge push for, learning new things, and the engineers wanted to grow to, okay, we are opening up a part of the engine to the engineers. You don't need to understand everything, but some part of it, but we are still driving a car rather than, charting a plane, which could be
serverless, for example. Yeah. I mean, it's nice typically you don't need to know how a car runs until it breaks down, right? And I think that's a very nice comparison. Yes. So once your code starts to break, it's probably good to know some of the basics of how an engine works to be able to fix some of the stuff yourself. Yeah, nice picture. All right, so you went for the open source solution there. And I think back then the decision between, Docker Swarm and Mesosphere and Kubernetes was almost done, I'd say. Okay, so tell me, then let's talk a bit about how did you plan and execute the migration? And I remember you always refer to this as 3 chapters,
yes.
Like 3 chapters in the book. Maybe you want to explain a bit what you mean with that.
Yes. So there's the thing with plans, right? So you probably all have plans maybe in your OKRs for this quarter or for the year. And if you stick to the plans through the whole time period and have not changed your plans, it basically means you have not learned anything new. So I say chapters because it kind of depicts better like the things that happen, and each chapter was flavored by the person who was driving this topic forward. And 3 chapter means 3 different parties who have been driving the migration forward, and with that come a lot of learning. So that's kind of why I say we have kind of 3 chapters.
So let's start with the first one then. How did you get started on that journey? What were your first steps?
Yes. So nobody in our organization really had lots of Kubernetes experience before infrastructure, but one of our team leads took this topic on and drove it forward. He already had some interest before in infrastructure, was managing most of the things also before Heroku on the AWS side. And the first thing we needed to do was Dockerize everything, introduce containers, because we were pushing from Git directly to Heroku. And the good thing is we had a homogeneous stack. So the stack that I showed before with MongoDB and Node and so on, it's still the same. It was still the same at the beginning, and we're still there. So it was very easy to migrate these things and write.
Easy to write the Docker files, right? It's always the same file. Or
Exactly. And then we incrementally migrated those microservices. I'm not sure how many there were, maybe 10, 15. Took the one, with least business risk and low load, and then step by step move them over. I think that was all fine. What I really remember is one thing about configuration management again, and how do we want to handle configuration in secrets. And back then, we said, okay, maybe in the long run, we want to go with Vault or something similar. But for now, we need something quick. So we just put everything into one repository. And obviously, that turned out to be a point of failure, which we'll then have corrected in chapter 2.
Why was that a mistake?
Yes, so there was basically a bottleneck, and in many ways, and the deployment pipelines constantly broke, and there were conflicts. And I remember when then the initial person was driving it forward. He was with us for more than 3 years, left the company, and we had another SRE for the first time. He spent like 50% of his time trying to fix the pipelines, and so we understood that this was one of the first things we kind of fixed. So going into chapter 2 already, we put the configuration next to the code into the repository with the applications, and kind of decentralized all these things. And then we got to a really, really stable setup. Another thing that I learned.
I mean, how did you run the deployments? Did you use Helm or?
Yes, we used Helm. Yes, okay. And that was also something interesting. The initial person introduced Helm, and then the second person introduced Customize. And in chapter 3 now, in the current state, we are back to Helm.
Okay, so it's a back and forth journey. All right, but let's look a bit more into chapter 2. So you hired a new SRE. He went through this very difficult task of constantly fixing broken pipelines. That's really nothing you want to do. And then how did things change? What did that person do to drive the change towards more self-service and more stability?
Yes, so one thing I noticed, due to the fact that the first person left, and this can happen again, I really defined with that SRE what kind of the purpose is. And I looked up the slides from I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I still have this here, which basically says, let me bring it up, build a reliable, scalable, and secure infrastructure foundation that enables engineers to build, deploy, debug, monitor, and maintain their services.
So it's again this this cognitive load thing, right? It sounds pretty much like that.
Yes. So we want to enable the engineers to be effective end to end, and so because I was managing, I was not really executing these kind of things. For me, it was important that we kind of follow this philosophy, and this is still kind of something we stick to today, which helped a lot with making decisions along the way, and for this person to run into the right direction. And during that time, also we were able to decommission Shipyard, which was this distributed monolith creator, as I name it, and get rid of that. And then actually there was a time, because this person also left after around half a year, where we didn't have anyone in infra or SRE for, I don't know, 2 to 4 weeks. And thankfully, everything until then was so stable that it was not an issue. We didn't have any incident in that time. Of course, our infrastructure didn't evolve, but everybody was deploying code multiple times per day. So that was kind of a first big milestone for us.
What were limitations during that time? I understand everything was stable, so I mean that's good. But I mean there is a chapter 3. So what were the limitations that you then had to work on in the next chapter?
Yes. So one thing is this person created some manual Python scripts for deploying the services. They worked also for temporary deployments, but very hard to maintain and take over from the next person. There was very little documentation and so on. So this was kind of one of the next big learnings we made, to rather stick with off-the-shelf tools instead of implementing our own things, because our setup wasn't that special in terms of workload and so on. So could have sticked with the things that we introduced in chapter 3 right from the beginning. Yeah.
Nice. And then you hired Martin. I think I had the pleasure to meet Martin last year, and I think he's also in the call. So what's that chapter 3 about?
Yes, last year, then at the beginning in February, Martin joined, and he was kind of tasked to build up this SRE team. At the beginning of the year, we are now overall 5, including him. And they really turned things again to the next level. They act more like as consultants and enablers. They defined a standardized deployment pipeline. We came back to Helm. We use external DNS. We use SOPs now, SOPS from, I think, Mozilla for secrets management, which is really great. It's convenient and secure. We started investing way more into infrastructure as code, Terraform. And the SRE team is dog fooding everything. So we are now in a pretty good setup overall.
So you have this team of 5-6 people to actually build your internal developer platform, so that the other developers can just focus on pushing out code. Really nice.
Kind of with a lot of off-the-shelf tools, basically. This was really also a big learning. It's much easier to maintain. You can point people to documentation on the web, like if they want to learn about Helm or Terraform and so on. And it's also easier to hire for that, because if you have your own specific tools, you will need to have your separate onboarding for that. And there's lots of hidden costs involved.
Yeah. How much do your people need to, how much do your developers need to know about these basic concepts, how Kubernetes works, what Helm is, how Terraform works? I mean, there's a lot of, if you start to dig deeper, Kubernetes is quite complex. So how much do you train?
So they need to understand the basics as they are writing the manifests in the repositories. But that's it. So it's all GitOps, and they commit it, and in the background, everything is being managed of the SRE team, the deployments. So it's really just, they need to understand, okay, how do services work and so on, how do pods work, these main concepts, and they need to be able to write manifests.
Yeah, I think Martin put that in a very nice words. Must have 1+ year of shipyard experience is nothing you can put in a job ad. I agree. That's the problem with internal tooling. Always is. So cool. So you say you rely on standard available frameworks and tools, and have your engineers, obviously depending on where they work, right? Understand at least the basics, or I mean, probably if they're in the SRE team, a lot of this to keep things running. Cool. Also, looking at the time, we're half an hour in. Maybe it's time to draw the conclusions from all of that. And because then I would have a final question for you. My typical question: what's next? But maybe before we go there, what are your learnings from 3 chapters of migration? Your path to Heroku and away from Heroku. Your path on building your own internal your own internal platform team.
Yes.
So, what are your key learnings?
Yeah, for me, it was really connecting it to the bigger picture. So I highlighted this a little bit at the beginning. I really think about, you need to understand the company strategy, the product strategy, and from there you can derive architecture and infrastructure in your software delivery capabilities. And it's really important that you understand roughly how your target architecture should look like, and what should the software delivery capabilities be, so that the engineers are really effective and efficient and developing the code. So this was kind of like putting it into the bigger context. And apart from that, most often we don't have a so special setup. So going with off-the-shelf tools makes many things much easier, from hiring to documentation, onboarding. And this was probably the biggest learning, especially that I could have hired an architect earlier, like during Heroku times already, right? Who tackled this, but well, yeah, that was that's how you learn the best if it's painful, yeah.
You always know afterwards, absolutely. How difficult is it to set up such a strong internal platform team? I guess it's not an easy task to hire people that are knowledgeable in that space.
Yes, I mean, overall it took us probably around half a year to a year to find Martin, and then another year to have our team of 5 in place. So we worked also with agencies and so on. So it's definitely also quite challenging. Yeah. We knew it was, but I didn't think it was that challenging. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you find out once doing it. Okay, so then maybe before jumping into questions from the audience, so you can prepare yourself. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat now. But what's next? I mean, now you're on Kubernetes. You seem to have very stable processes, managing everything well. So what's next?
Yes, so there are kind of 4 high-level points, I would say. First of all, we want to have multiple clusters with multiple regions. We are doing a lot of business also in China. So in addition to Europe, we want to also support Far East Asia. As another point, we want to have audited and automated escalations for engineers to deal with incidents. So meaning if an incident happens, they can get elevated access to production for a temporary time. And this is audited and automated. So this is something we want to work on in the future. And another thing is we want to have the ability to deploy all of the apps that complete Forto to a new blank cluster in one single shot. And the last point is we want to be more passwordless in a sense. So we want to remove passwords for SQS, SNS, S3, Google Storage in favor for pod identity and workload identity. These are kind of the next big things that will go for the next couple of years. Yeah.
Why this one-click deployment?
That's a good question. Yes. So if something goes down, we really want to have the whole cluster up in a very, very short amount of time. And so this is also kind of the test on how well do we have, are we well using infrastructure as code, right? So if
it's
something
is
missing,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. So this is kind of the ultimate test whether we have everything covered. We want to be prepared for kind of the worst. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. If you look at the key DevOps metrics, where do you see huge improvement over the last years, and where do you see room for improvement? It seems that mean time to recover is something you want to work on.
Yes, exactly.
How about the others?
Yes. So in general, we are doing pretty well. So we got also an independent assessment around the 4 DevOps metrics, cycle time, deployment frequency, and so on. And we are right now in the elite, but kind of more at the bottom part. So in terms of lead time and deployment frequency, we are doing pretty well. On change failure rate and MTTR, something we can get better at. So this is something we are focusing more in the next years. Nice,
cool. But yeah, great to measure that against the standard set of KPIs. I think that's a great idea. All right. Anything you want to add? Otherwise, I'd be open for questions if people have questions.
Yes, please.
Or you explained everything so well. Explained everything so well that there are no questions. Which is also fine.
I guess, I mean, in European Germany, it's already 6 something, so.
Yeah. No, we do have a question. Pedro, we use Heroku review apps to easily bring up test application to test a specific pull request in isolation. Did you use something like that? Or, and if you did, how did you migrate that workflow to Kubernetes?
I barely remember, but I remember there was something like that, but I think we didn't get that far. Yeah, I think we went to Kubernetes earlier.
Okay. So I mean, I would have an answer.
We also had kind of shipyard, I think. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, we can bring up Martin.
Cool. Yeah.
Maybe you can do that, but. Also, I mean, this is something that we are working on a lot. I think it's one of the core features of the product we are building, but I don't want to go into that in detail. But it's a very fair question. How do you bring up QA environments? How do you bring up environments for automated end-to-end testing or for manual testing, depending on feature branches? It's a very valid thing. So Florian, maybe did you bring Martin into the? Martin, can you also speak now? I'm not sure. Florian is managing the webinar. He's trying to unmute Martin. Okay. So in the details of configuration in Demio. Nice. But maybe while we wait for Martin, would you change something if you could do it again? That's a great question. So if you would do that journey again, would you change something? And if yes, what would you change?
Yes, one of the things is I would have an architect earlier and make sure that SRE and architect, they work together from the very beginning. That's one thing. Make sure that, especially like if you have, instead of having not one SRE, at least have 2. So it's more difficult to have like these, how do you say, manual Python scripts that do something that others cannot maintain. And start maybe even really a bit earlier, thinking about this whole thing. But these are the main topics. Yeah.
What I find interesting in that, before handing over to you, Martin, is that I think the decision for Heroku is nothing you would do different, because at that time it was a good solution for you, right? So
that was fine,
it really depends on the size of the team. That's always interesting. If I listen to people and they say, no, we need to do Kubernetes, but if you're only 3 people or 5, maybe you don't. Because
yes, especially also considering like it's very expensive to have a good SRE team, and if you have very limited budget, you gotta think twice on where you want to spend it. So you need also to have the skills then ready from the beginning, and that was not possible for us back then.
Yeah, it's a very good place. So Martin, great to see you again, even though it's only virtual. So maybe you can talk a bit about how can you bring up review apps, how can you bring up certain pull requests to just see what's happening, or certain branches.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had some interesting things with that. So with the packaging of things in Helm really helps, because you can really template your deployments to a level where you can say what the name is, what the service that it connects to is. And as long as you make sure that that is nice and complete, your packaging, you can actually run multiple copies of an application in Kubernetes. And by using external DNS, one of the amusing things is Helm 2 had these lovely names where it called things like Leaping Lemming and things. Helm 3 dropped that, but we've actually built that into our pipeline back in from Helm 2. So when people create a pull request, it will install onto the sandbox cluster a copy of the application straight away from the pull request. With this temporary name, and then it just puts a comment into the pull request saying, here's your temporary deployment name, click here to get it, and then when you close it, it deletes it again.
Yeah, so and then you're separating with namespaces so that everything runs smoothly next to each other.
Yeah.
Nice, yeah, thanks for...
One of the things was that the original system of all the shell scripts, one of the things was that the temporary deployments would use the same secret. And what's really important is to make sure that your Helm package combines absolutely everything, because otherwise you can't make changes to those differently. So you can't have a temp deployment accessing something that the main deployment doesn't have.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're just in the process of publishing also an article about application configuration management, because that's basically what it is, and how to package it, and what to do and what not to do. And it's pretty much in line what you're saying is you should also make sure that you're accessing the right external resources. So don't access your production database from your newly created, or even your staging database from your newly created temp environment.
Yeah, ideally, yeah.
Cool. So I think, it's 1:45, so we reached the end of this session. Thank you so much, Masa, for sharing this with us. We will try to, we talked about that before the webinar, we will try to bring this also into an article so that people can read up about your journey from Heroku and then to Kubernetes, and your way of establishing an internal platform team. Really impressive. It's great to have you here. Thanks also, Martin, for being with us. And I hope we can meet in person again sometimes. Probably
thank
not
you,
too
Christoph.
soon, but sometimes at least.
Thanks for having me. Thanks to the whole team at Humanitech, and thanks for everyone who joined. Stay safe and healthy.
Cool. Yeah, same to you. And as I said in the beginning, we'll send the recording of this webinar and a few useful links, for example, to your GitHub repository and your old project to enforce environment variables in an email tomorrow. Thank you. Good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.